All right, good evening, everyone. Nice to see a great crowd, beautiful weather. The Founders Day again is being held, and just as spring is bursting around us, and so it's a good time to get together at the Loveland building for another historical presentation. I'm going to start with a song that was written about the bridge disaster. I didn't know about this song until about 2 weeks ago. When Mark Stock let me know about this thing, and I got a hold of the guy who made this song, who produced it, and he approved it for me to share it with you. So I want you to hear the song about the dark day in Dixon. Take a listen.
It was a dark day in Dixon. Sun shone bright on the water. There was joy in every heart. They would depart 18 feet to the icy deep. It was a dark day in Dixon. We turned people to water. 46 souls baptized, never to rise. No escape from their rise. Where was God that day when the river carried our children away? No one to blame, but the devil had a way when they got in the name on that dark, dark day. Some bridges near they crossed. Ain't enough for soul that's lost. Some bridges can't be burned. After all the lessons learned.
So that's John McLemore, who lived in Dixon from 2012 to 2020. I think I've got those numbers right. And then he married an Elmendorf from Dixon, and then they moved to Florida, where he is a full-time musician down there. But he heard about the bridge disaster when he was living in Dixon, and that's when he penned this song. I thought it was a good way to start out, to let you hear that the fame of this event is being spread not only just in town, but also elsewhere in the media through that. To put this somewhat in perspective, I'm going to have to move so I can get closer to see my slides. My eyesight is fading. This is 1873 when this bridge went down. Think back 8 years, only 8 years earlier, the Civil War had just ended with Appomattox and Lee and Grant getting together. That's just 8 years before this thing happened. At that time, the United States had only 37 states, not the 50 that we have today. This is going way back now. Ulysses S. Grant was the president of the United States in 1873. He defeated Horace Greeley in 1872. I think my dad remembers that election. He voted for Greeley, as I recall. But that's what's going on nationally. But in Dixon, the population here is only 4,000 people. We got a mayor, Joseph Crawford. We are under the aldermanic system. We had 8 aldermen representing different wards around town. There are only 7 churches in town. Today we've got something 30-some. There are 2 weekly newspapers in Dixon, not just 1 daily, but 2 weekly newspapers. There's no electricity, no automobiles, no paved roads. It's all dirt out there. And there's only 1 bridge connecting the north side to the south side for pedestrians. There's also a railroad bridge, but you're not going to take that in your horse and buggy to get across. Bridges in Dixon, there have been at least 8 up to this point in Dixon. They were all destroyed by ice and floods. None of them lasted very long at all. They're made of wood, and as the Telegraph said in 1951, they all collapsed like toothpicks whenever the river went on of its frequent rampages, which is about this time of year, March and April. The ice is melting, and over the dam it comes and takes out everything in its path, which it did. So 8 wood bridges, and the community was tired of it. Because when the bridge goes out, you can't get from here to the other side. You just can't. So that's what's going on. There's a picture here of the Lucky Bridge. You may have heard or seen this photo before. This is standing at the top of like where the arch is, looking down toward the river. The Lucky Bridge didn't last very long at all, but you can see it's a dirt ground. There's horses, and this is 1861. This is 12 years before the Truesdell Bridge. Here's a map of 1868. This map hangs proudly in the Historical Society offices on South Hennepin. You ought to take a look at this map. But take a look at here. There's no west end here. These are the 3 arches, you call the viaducts, you know. And they go basically to nothing west of there. And this is of course, the railroad bridge. There's only 1 bridge across the water right there at the Galena Avenue area. There's nothing there at Peoria. The north side is barely developed, and the south side is more developed. But basically, here's the important point with this. Almost everybody lives within 5 to 8 blocks of the bridge. And so when something happens, everybody comes. And they did on that fateful day. Here's a photo from 1869 where you can see what's going on Galena Avenue, going up the hill. There are horses tied up to their hitching posts, all up and down. Again, this is not paved. This is just dirt road. That's the courthouse there, the one that preceded the one we have now on the courthouse square. That's the spire from the Presbyterian Church, which is still there to this day. And that's the Nachusa House, of course, at the top of the hill. But all that is still there in 1873. I was able to find the actual patent for the Truesdell Bridge. And this is a copy of it here. He had actually developed it in 1856 for an iron truss bridge. The idea with his design was to have a bunch of short pieces, light pieces, that you could haul out on wagons to rural locations and then just sort of assemble the bridge kind of like a Tinker's toy set or an erector set. And that was basically the idea here. You see what's going on with this. He had several bridges actually in Illinois. Belvedere had a bridge. It was 244 feet long. Elgin had one, and Geneva had one that was 525 feet long. But the Dixon Bridge was to be the largest of all the Truesdell bridges at 660 feet, which we'll talk about here in a minute. The City Council had 3 different ballots before they finally came to a 5-3 vote. The first 2 ballots were 4-4 tie. Some people were against the Truesdell Bridge proposal, and some people were strongly in favor of it. But finally, somebody changed their mind and voted in favor of the bridge, and it might have been Underwood himself, if memory serves me. But he made the statement, the people were crazy for an iron bridge. They're tired of this wood stuff, and the idea of having an iron bridge that was solid, that's not going to be knocked down like toothpicks every spring, that was very much appealing to the City Council at that time. As the Decatur Weekly Republican wrote in about this time, Mr. Truesdell warrants every bridge to give perfect satisfaction. He certainly has the best thing out yet. They are unequaled for strength and symmetry and are rapidly growing into favor. That wasn't published in Dixon, that was published in Decatur. So the fame of the Truesdell Bridge is getting out there quite a bit at this point. This is the dedication of the Truesdell Bridge that took place in January of 1869. They had a big parade, everybody's lined up on the bridge. Somebody standing up on top of Considine's Tavern or someplace, you know, right there on the south side of the bridge looking north. Couple things to note, it's 660 feet long. It's the longest bridge that Truesdell ever made. Couple things to note of these yellow dots. Back here on this end of the bridge, it's a sloping bank, not the brick or rock seawall you have today. That was produced after that time. It was just a sloping bank going down so they could easily go down there for baptism. And that's, by the way, where the collapse took place. That's where the baptism took place. Not on the south side, by downtown. On the other side, close to where the Lincoln statue is to this day. I also want to draw attention to all these Hanyaks on the bridge. You kids, get down from there! What are you doing? But they seem to let them go, and they're just having a ball climbing on the bridge. They tested it on that day to show how sturdy it was going to be. Well, let's all get out there and show how good it's going to be. Well, luckily it didn't fall then. But they also brought a couple of teams of cattle and horses out there with a load of whatever. And they said, oh, this is a great thing. And Dixon was very proud of this bridge. This is a zoom in of that particular shot showing the dimensions. The roadway itself is only 18 feet wide. You could barely fit, I don't know if you could fit 2 cars on there. 18 feet, I forget the width of its standard car. Was it 8 feet, 10, 9 feet? I don't know. But there's a 15-foot truss. There's actually 2 of them. I'm calling this a truss, this big tall thing. And there's a 5-foot sidewalk, which becomes very important here to our story, with a 3-foot high railing. And that's where all the people would line up for the baptism, as we'll see here in just a moment. I think I'm losing some sharpness here. Bear with me for a second. That's a little better. My vision's going bad, so I never know anymore. But the Dixon Weekly Herald said, a structure more truly grand and beautiful to the eye can be found in no western city, and we presume in no eastern. Yeah, okay. It reminds me from that line in The Music Man where the mayor of River City says, I'll put my River City band up against any band west of the Mississippi. Apparently they used to brag like that about their stuff, and they thought that the Truesdell Bridge was just this magnificent piece of work. And it does look glorious there, and people were very proud of it at that time. This little ticket, I think Steve had one of these out there. It's out there on the table. That's up here in the Loveland Museum upstairs. And that's the actual ticket you had to use, because this is a toll bridge. Yes, you had to pay a toll to walk across this bridge. People paid a nickel. Horses also paid a nickel. And vehicles drawn by 4 animals had to pay 40 cents. But one more important detail is this one. Women or children attending church or school or ministers were free. So, but the event took place on a Sunday, and there was a baptism down, and so all the churches were on the south side. And so everybody got on the bridge, and you could get on it for free, right? And your chance to get out there, well, let's go out there on the bridge today. It doesn't cost a nickel, right? And a nickel's a lot of money back then. And the receipts for 1872, by the way, they hauled in over $5,000. That's a lot of nickels. Yeah, I think it's like 100,000 nickels to be exact. That's how many people or how many animals crossed that thing during 1873. To compare today's bridge to that bridge, today's bridge is 713 feet long. And we now have the wisdom to know you don't start right at the riverbank. You back up a good business, and then you go up that on the other side. Do the same thing there. It's 30 feet wide total. 18 feet here, and you got a 5-foot here and 5-foot here, and these things are 2 feet wide, so you got a total of 30 feet wide. But today, our bridge is 102 feet wide. It's like 4 times as wide as the Truesdell Bridge was at that time. Now, an interesting thing happens while the Truesdell Bridge is under construction and Dixon's getting excited about their bridge. This is July 4th of 1869. The Truesdell Bridge in Dixon has been open for like 6 months. But they're having a tub race down the river in Elgin above the Truesdell Bridge there. Well, it collapses just partially on that day, but it only goes into 4 feet of water. 30 or 40 people are injured, 1 person dies, but it's the second failure of the same bridge, built on the same principles and patent of L.E. Truesdell. You can see some similarities with the railing and some of the ironwork here. So very interesting. When he was asked about the collapse of the Elgin Bridge, he says, well, it must have been tampered with. And he offered, I'll offer a $10,000 reward for the detection of the guilty parties. Okay, well, there's the only difference between Elgin, there's a single truss bridge, and the Dixon was a double truss bridge, and to be honest, I have no idea what that means. So, let's come down to that. We're finally to that fateful day. It's Sunday, the 4th of May of 1873. Today is April the 11th, and the weather's gorgeous out here now, but it had been a rather cold winter in Dixon that winter, but it's a beautiful day in May to take the church out and do a baptism, and the First Baptist Church is going out to the river. This is a painting by Fran Swarbrick in 2002, and she really did a remarkable job with this painting. The detail is really accurate, right down to so many different things in this thing. One thing that's probably not accurate is how close where the minister is baptizing. He's, if you get out this far in the water, you're not ankle deep, or knee deep, whatever it is. He's also, according to the paper, he was a few rods downstream and not out that deep in the water. But otherwise, all the truss and the railing and the people and the piers of the bridge, all this is dead on, pretty darn correct. I gotta hand it to her. It's an 18-foot drop to the water. That song you just heard, 18 feet they fell. Well, that's the 18 feet he's referring to. And then once you got into the water, it's 15 to 20 feet deep at that point. And it's going to vary, of course, by high water time and low water time. Like right now, we've got high water in the Rock River. And the water is moving at 8 miles an hour, whatever that means. But there's a current in the water, which becomes also important at that day. So it's 1 p.m., and Pratt is proceeding to baptize 6 people. He had marched them down from the Baptist church, crossed over the bridge, and they came down onto the bank of the river on the north side now, and he's baptizing some people. He's a few rods west of the bridge, and a rod is about 15 feet. We don't measure things in rods anymore, but that's what they said. That's about the only thing I found that helped me figure out exactly where the baptism took place. There's 150 to 200 spectators. Several people said that that's about the number that was out there, hanging out there on the bridge. You can see them on this painting. Boys and a few men are on the truss, as they were, Can't stop them from doing that. The sidewalks are crowded, mostly with women and children, though, at this time. The paper said that Mr. Pratt, the pastor, he detained the crowd longer than is customary, feeling the importance of impressing upon them the advantage to be derived from coming to Jesus. A crucial quote, and he actually gave this quote to I think it's the Tribune, the Chicago Tribune. He admitted, I wanted to get a big crowd, and it turned out the big crowd was the problem. Yeah. And there are 3 words that came out to me as I read through all these newspaper stories. There's a crack, and there's a fall, and there's a shriek that comes out of all these people, and mostly women up there on the bridge, screaming as they all drop 18 feet into the water. It's important to understand what happened here. It's not as though the bridge just collapsed and went straight down. The bridge falls over. It turns over on top of these people. They're here basically along this sidewalk, and this big 15-foot monstrosity is behind them, and they go down like this. This helps to explain why so many people died on that fateful day. As the Tribune said, this truss fell over with the weight and imprisoned the doomed in an iron cage with which they sunk and from which there was no escape. A horrific way to go. And that's one reason why this was so tragic. A despairing shriek was the death knell of many an unbaptized soul, said the Tribune. The Dixon Sun said, without a moment's notice, the summons came and the baptism of water became a baptism of blood and death. You might think, well, how could people drowning, how does blood enter into this? Well, blood entered into this because there's so much iron behind you and it's crushing on you. Here's another quote I think I found. Some sank to rise no more. Some were killed before they touched the water. Some were entangled in the debris. Some jumped from the bridge and swam ashore. And these four fateful words, the weak generally succumb. The more I read of all these different newspaper stories, there's hundreds of them, these four words really rang true. The weak generally succumb. And one more quote that I ran across. Nearly all the loss of life was owing to the crushing force of the bridge, for all who came alive to the surface of the water were quickly saved. So it's just those who found themselves trapped between that 15-foot truss and that 3-foot railing in front of them. And yes. And this is an illustration to put together in one of the Chicago papers of what took place on that day. You notice people are flailing in the water, people diving off the bridge. There's women swooning, there's men rushing out into the water to help people. This woman is passed out here and somebody trying to revive her. And here in the center, the minister's still baptizing people. Certainly it couldn't have been just exactly like that, but it's an idea of what was going on that fateful day. There was panic in the water. This is J.H. Pratt, the pastor. He said the river became full of floating bodies. He had walked out there and he was baptizing the third person of 6 people, and all of a sudden, down it goes, and floating bodies start going by him. And he starts grabbing them by the hair and by the shoulder, by the pants, whatever, just to get them into shore. The testimony of Colonel Noble, who was well known in town. I think he was in the Civil War. He was also a teacher. His son was a teacher, I think, as well. He said, when he went into the water, a man caught hold of me and I went down under, but I freed myself from this guy. He could not reach his wife, for there was a mass of human beings between him and her. This is what the Telegraph is reporting on May the 5th. But this happened to so many people. When they went down into the water, they're struggling to get up, but there's other people who are down below them trying to get up there, and so they grab onto people on top of them and pulling them down so they can get themselves up. It's just panic in the water, people trying to save themselves and possibly not saving somebody else at the same time. There's the story of Jacob Armstrong. This story was in the Minneapolis Star Tribune. And let me just pause for a second, just explain. I wanted to explain, I'm giving you the exact quotes of what's in the paper in 1873. I'm not summarizing, I'm not trying to draw conclusions for the most part. I'll do some of that, but I'm trying to tell you exactly what they said in 1873, not what somebody said about it later on and guess what was going on. I'm showing you exactly the words that were in the paper of all these different papers that were published throughout the country. So the Minneapolis Star Tribune says, underwater, there were women and children, some men, all striving to clutch hold of something to save themselves. Some poor fellow caught hold of me and would have dragged me down, only I managed to get free and began striking out with my right hand. So they're actually fighting each other just to get to the surface. And this is Jacob Armstrong, a young man. I think he's only 16. Then there's the testimony of Dr. Hoffman, who went down with the bridge as well. When I sank, he said, the current rolled me over and over, and my hands frequently came in contact with the gravel on the riverbed. I could feel the water running down my throat and in my ears. And all at once I experienced the most delightful sensation. I seemed to be at peace with everything and perfectly happy. And his testimony goes on, he says, my whole life passed before me like a flash of lightning. I did not want to be disturbed. While in the midst of this reverie, I thought what my wife would do if she were saved and I drowned, because they both went down together. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I was pulled out and placed on a rock. But he was saved. It turned out his wife did not survive, and he was saved alone on that day. Very, very sad. This is a photo of the collapse from the south side of the bridge looking north. By 6 p.m. that night, 5 hours after the collapse, they've pulled 37 bodies out. But at midnight, the newspapers reported the general estimate of the number lost is from 90 to 100. There are therefore supposed to be at least 50 bodies yet unfound. They couldn't get that 15-foot truss out of the water, especially on that first day. It's too heavy. And so they feared there's just dozens of bodies still underneath that thing, and we got to get that thing up. And just a quick note, they went and got a derrick, and they called it a derrick. It's more like a crane. I think they used the word derrick back then. But they got a crane, the train, the Illinois Central Railroad brought it to town the next day, but it turned out that wasn't heavy enough to lift this big honking truss, and then they had to get another one from the Quad Cities, and the train brought it out. Oh my God. And all these bodies, there's people looking for their kids and their mothers and such all this time. So let's talk about how they died. This is always a fun topic. I want to get this out of the way early on in the presentation, so you stay with me. It gets a little happier as we go on. But I want you to notice all these iron pieces, because they start to have a scissors-like effect as this bridge goes down. Like the story of Katie Sterling, who was 16 years old. The crisscross ironwork of the bridge pivoted like shears. Katie Sterling's arm was caught between these irons. I didn't put the rest of this code in there. I took it out. It's just too gruesome, but I'll tell you what it says anyway. She died, but her body was captured by the iron, and it took them 2 days to cut her body free from the ironwork. That's how gruesome this was. And she's not the only one. This is a 16-year-old girl. Another one. At a depth of 6 inches, says the Tribune, below the surface of the water, the hands and faces of persons could be felt as they lay embraced by the debris. They could look down and see their faces, but they couldn't get to the surface because all that iron was on top of them. Oh, it's frightening to look down, but to look up and to see daylight, be only 12 inches from air, and can't get there. That's what was going on. There's the story of Ida Van, who was 17 years old. She and her mother, Eliza, fell together, locked in each other's arms. Mrs. Van was pulled out from the debris, still alive but unconscious. Her daughter had been killed instantly, but when she awoke, her first question to the people around her was, "Is Ida drowned?" The watchers around her bed said, "No." They lied, right? But she again relapsed into unconsciousness, and she never revived again. Both of them died in this disaster. They went down locked in each other's arms, but they both died, a mother and her daughter, from the bridge. The story of Seth Whitmore, 50-year-old guy. C.H. Keyes, his testimony is recorded. He crossed the railroad bridge to help. And he said, Seth Whitmore had just been taken from the river and was suffering dreadfully. I helped to get him into one of the houses nearby. I shall never forget the dreadful pain it caused him to move. His body had been crushed between the girders of the bridge. All these broken internal bones, ribs and such, on his life. Just to move him caused incredible pain. This idea of C.H. Keyes crossing the railroad bridge, I had to look into this a little closer. And here's a map, and this shows you C.H. Keyes' path. He is at the Methodist Church when he hears about this going on. Goes down Galena, sees what's going on, realizes he can't get across, runs all the way down to the railroad bridge. And up here there's a 10-inch wide plank. And he's going like this. to get across. Oh man, you got to be motivated. And he was motivated. He made it all the way across, ran all the way down about 6-7 blocks to get to where Seth Whitmore was, and he then proceeded to help other people get out of the water. But that shows you the despair of the city without a bridge. How are you going to get from here to there? And that railroad bridge, you know, is way up there. It's not low toward the ground. If you fall off that thing, you're going way down. Now let's talk about the injury. We talked about the deaths, but let's talk a little bit about the injuries. I'll just summarize them here with a list. There were scalp wounds, ankle injuries, arms broken, dislocated shoulders, lacerations, bruises, ribs, sprained wrist, internal injuries, spine injuries, chest injuries, shock, of course, collarbone, head lacerations, deep wounds. And this last one, this word, I kept seeing this in the various newspaper reports, strangulation. When I think of somebody being strangled, I think of somebody grabbing them by the neck and shaking them, right, and cutting off their... But what strangulation was used back in the 1800s at this time to refer to anybody who just simply couldn't get air. And so, like my great-grandmother was said to have strangulation. Air was cut off and she was pulled out of the water at age 3.5. I'll tell you about her in a little bit longer. But that's what strangulation shows up in the water. Like I think in Kitty Daly was insensible from strangulation in the water. Frank Bisco was in the same condition of strangulation. This was in the Telegraph on May the 15th. This is like 11 days after the event. Horrific stuff. In total, 56 people were injured. They were listed, their names were listed in the paper. 31 of them were male, 25 of them were female. Let's talk about rescues. This is a little more positive. Some people were rescued by boat. They had to rush and get boats quickly, but others speedily brought ropes, planks, and boats and went nobly to work to rescue the living as well as to recover the dead. Because there's these bodies out there, they've got to be brought to shore, but there's also people who are flailing around in the water and they have to be recovered. And some people quickly got a boat. I don't know how quickly you could do that, but they must have had some close by and get them out there and start helping people. This drawing, this is not a photo, this is a drawing from the south side showing some boats out there in the water, probably on the next day, of people doing whatever they could to help do whatever they can, which is probably not much at this point. People were rescued by the boat, like this story. 2 little girls, sisters, went down together. The eldest caught the other by her dress with one hand, and with the other clung to a portion of the ironwork and clung fast to it up to her neck in icy water until they were saved by a boat. So the little sister's hanging on for all her dear life and hoping big sister can hang on to her until the boat finally gets there, and it has to be a long time. But big sister hung on and they both survived. So a real heroic rescue on that day. Some people were rescued by plank. The planks of the bridge were loosened by the crash, and floating off were the means of saving a large number of people who clung to them. This plank thing kind of confused. Where are these planks coming from? Well, look at this photo and look a little closer. Now let's zoom in on that. See all these planks? It's the roadbed for the bridge. And when this thing goes down, they all come loose and go floating out in the water, and it actually becomes something of a lifesaver for people who are floating in the water. So planks helped out. Then, of course, there were rescues by people. Several people were credited with being real heroes in the newspaper. Isaac Means worked hard all day Sunday and Monday. He was everywhere. W.G. Stevens didn't pause to consider the dangers he encountered to aid others. Henry Palmer assisted 3 ladies from the water. Stories like this go on and on and on of so many different guys who went out there. And yes, it was all guys who were doing the rescuing on that day. J.H. Pratt, for example, he knew how to approach and rescue many. Through his individual efforts, 10 or 15 were saved. He knew what the riverbed was like. He'd been walked out there many times for baptism ceremonies, so he knew how far he could get to grab people, and so he got 10 or 15 himself. Another story here. The people of North Dixon, according to the Dixon Sun, especially along the river, shared everything they had. They opened up their houses. Blankets, shawls, clothing, sheets, quilts, cloths, cotton, woolen goods, and materials of every description were freely given. The houses were filled with the dead, the dying. And these last 4 words, 1,000 anxious inquirers. And reading some of this stuff is just really disturbing because, you know, you may have been separated from your mom and she's up there on the bridge during the baptism, but then it goes down. Mom, where are you? Little Lizzie, where are you? I can't find her. Is she under the bridge? Is she in the water? Did she drown? Where is she? And people who weren't even there on that day, they knew that the family went to church or maybe went down on the river, but they haven't seen the son or the daughter or the mom or the dad or the uncle or whatever, and they're searching, where's my kids? Where's my parents? Where are they? And so this is going on. And the bodies and the dying are being brought into these homes along the riverbank there. People just opened up their homes to help out, and I think anybody would, right? I hope so. Then there are some survivor stories that are rather interesting. Jacob Armstrong, I mentioned him earlier, he's 16 years old. He went down in the crash and was compelled to crawl on the bottom of the river out from underneath the sidewalk of the bridge. But being an athletic young man, he saved himself and then secured several others. Your ability to hold your breath and to have the presence of mind to crawl along the bottom to get underneath whatever is on top of you, and he made it outside and eventually went on to save others. Will Schuler, Joe Hayden, and Eustace Shaw narrowly escaped by swimming to the shore after extricating themselves from the ironwork, leaping from the bridge into the river. These 3 guys, is any of the Shaws with us tonight? I was wondering if they might come, because they are direct descendants. Today's Shaws, Tom Shaw and his kids, are all direct descendants of Eustace Shaw, who was on the bridge in that day. He's probably one of these Hanyak kids sitting up there on the truss. But the thing goes down and he just dives in, you know. It's not that, if you're up there, that was actually a fairly safe place to be. You don't want to be on the sidewalk. But he's up there, but he dives in, and then he is starting to help people. Here's a picture of him, Eustace Shaw. He's a young man of amphibious ability who can swim like an otter. He took to the river, got ashore, and then bravely sallied forth to rescue the drowning, bringing several to shore. And this is told by the Tribune. It wasn't the Shaw papers telling about this great story. It must have been real, right? Young fellow he was. Survivor stories. Edgar Patrick was nearing the shore. He was pulling the victim, getting closer to the shore. That he felt the body of a woman brushing against his leg in the water. He caught her dress and struggled forth with both. He's got one person in one hand, another, and he's dragging them up toward the riverbank. As he reached shallow water, William Van Epps ran down to the bank to help him. The woman that Mr. Patrick was carrying was Mrs. Van Epps, William's mom. Mom, what are you doing out here? You know, that kind of thing. But that's amazing. That's the story of Edgar Patrick. Clara Burr, this is one of my favorite stories. She was retrieved from some distance below the bridge by John Barry. So her body floated way down. She showed no signs of life. To revive her, the Dixon Sun said, John Barry procured a barrel and rolled her in it. Afterward, her clothing was removed and she was rubbed and chafed for over an hour. When she showed signs of life, she's now quite well. Now, what's with the barrel? I wondered. What's with the barrel? And what's with this rubbing and chafing? So I did a Google search. It turned out it's a thing. It was a thing. Nobody does it anymore, but here's to show you. There's actually, the barrel technique is described online. So somebody's drowned, you throw their belly on top of, you don't put them in the barrel. Must have been a typo in the paper. Put them on the barrel, and then you roll them with your ankles, you know, like this, and hopefully they'll belch out all the water that's in them. And if that doesn't work, you can do the rubbing and chafing technique, and there's a picture of this online. So you take their clothes off and you rub and you chafe. I'm not sure exactly what chafing is, but it apparently helps. And in the case of little Clara Burr, it saved her life. Now, I got a little more curious about this. I wondered, how old is Clara Burr? Now, the guys are laughing. None of the women are laughing right now. And so I finally got onto Ancestry.com and started searching for anybody in her family that I knew, and I found out how old she was during this event. She's 16 years old. And the story goes on with her. So while John Barry is rolling her in the barrel and then rubbing and just taking off her clothes and rubbing and chafing her, her dad and her big brother are frantically going up and down the riverbank looking for Clara! Clara! And they turn around and they see this young man has disrobed their daughter and he's rubbing and chafing all over her body. What did they do? They thanked him for what they did, because he saved her life. And she went on to live, I could even trace her life. She got married and eventually moved away from Dixon, lived a long life. She lived, so rubbing and chafing is not all it's cracked up with. Well, maybe it's better than I thought. Not sure whether the rubbing is better than the chafing, but I don't know the difference between the two. So that's the... I find that story funny. My wife doesn't think that's funny at all. So let's talk about finding the missing, because here's another aspect of the story. We talked about how people were saved and how they died and all the rescues and all that stuff. Then there's the missing. Because when daylight did come, this is on the second day, and the first corpse was borne to the shore, it was painful to see the eagerness with which people pressed around to catch a glimpse of the face or the clothes of the dead person they pulled out. And there are people who recognize, oh, that's Missy. And they just fall apart. And then there's other people who are, yes, it's not my sister, or that kind of thing. So there's rejoicing and there's tremendous lamentation going on when this took place. But on the missing situation, 1 week later, 5 bodies are still missing. And they're missing because people know my daughter didn't come home. Mom didn't come home. And I've been up and down the river, and I don't know where she is. So what's going on here? Watch this. This is an aerial view, Dixon to Sterling. This is the path that bodies took as they floated down the river, and finally making it to Sterling. It's 14 miles by a river length. Agnes Nixon was found here. Althea Hendricks, 6-year-old girl, was found there. Next to her was Pam Kentner, age 40, right there. A little bit further down is 14-year-old Allie Petersberger. Just a little further down from Frank Hamilton, 36 years old. And then poor 17-year-old Lizzie Mackey. Her body went over the dam in Sterling and washed up on the rocks just below that. And their bodies are found a week or so later. I don't know. Yeah, we live on the river, right? And you hear about drowning victims, and when's the body? Then they go, take grappling hooks and go to try to drag the. They did that too. It's gruesome and awful, and I thought this particular map helps to explain what happened on that fateful month of May of 1873. Overall, if you look at the tally of the dead, there are 46 dead. 80% are female. 21 of them, 47%, are under age 21. 3 of them are under age 10. Looking at that a little more closely, these are those who are under 18. These are their names and their ages. Notice one thing about all 14 of them, they're all female. No guys. All females. who died. And Pat Gorman found this photo of the Hendricks sisters, Lucia and Althea. They were ages 4 and 6 when they died. They both died in this disaster. And this photo must have been taken close to that time because they both look like they're about 4 and 6, right? Well, one of their bodies, again, went all the way down almost to Sterling, and one was found in Dixon. But how tragic. The story gets worse because their mother is a widow. She lost her husband in some accident, and she's trying to make ends meet by washing clothes. That was what she did. And now she has lost not only her husband, she's now lost both of her 2 daughters. She couldn't afford a funeral, but they took up a collection and helped to bury her daughters at Oakwood. Sad story. If you broke it down by the number of the churches that they went to, the Baptists had 14 people who died in the event. The Methodists had 8. The Universalist Church had 15, maybe 14, not sure there. Presbyterians 3, St. Pat's had 4, and the Lutherans had 2, and Episcopalians had 1. You might wonder why. I'm not sure about that. These add up to 47, by the way, and I'm wondering if there might have been one church that claimed the same person, well, they come to our church now and then, so they're one of ours. You know how that goes. It still happens to this day. So that's what's happening in the churches. Now, imagine what's going on then with funerals. And then what's going on with funerals is if you're a minister and you've got to deliver one of these sermons, something I've had to do many times, what are you going to say, smart guy? What are you going to say? Like that song that John McLemore, where was God that day when the river carried our children away? Well, sermons were published verbatim in the paper. And here's what Reverend J.H. Pratt said. I'll be going with the funerals here. There were 7 on Monday, 13 on Tuesday, several more funerals going on day after day after day. Oakwood Cemetery is busy all the time. You could see people buried off just a little way, 100 yards from you, and there's somebody over there burying it, somebody over here burying it. Oh my gosh, it's terrible. So what does J.H. Pratt say in his sermon? He said, God knew which to select. He knew no mistakes. All his ways were ways of righteousness, and all his acts were merciful. This is a theology I can't get my head around. The Methodist theology, this guy, I can understand where this guy's coming from. This is Williamson at the Methodist Church. He says, we cannot say that our Truesdell Bridge was smitten by the Almighty and fell as a judgment. It fell because its material supports were insufficient. The will of God in all ages is that all overloaded structures must give way. This theology I can get behind. But there was really a struggle, The Baptist Church at that time, strongly Calvinist, and Calvinist thinking at that time would have gone down that path very easily. I don't know where you would be on this. I don't know where the ministers in town would be on this. But I'd be preaching this sermon and not the other one myself. By the way, I just remember the Tribune also got into the act. It made the point that you cannot say that God had something to do with this because they're baptizing people. It's a church event. I mean, this is the holiest of holy activities, kind of like. So how can God be rendering judgment on this? It just doesn't make sense. But that was the Tribune offering their theology of the moment. Well, let's talk about Dixon and the aftermath. The aftermath of Dixon, it was estimated 10,000 people came to town to view the ruins. Thousands came by train. The only method of access to the north side is by the small boats ferrying the stream, and rapacious sharks are reaping a rich harvest by charging outrageous rates. So, you want to go over to the north side? Hop in my boat. that'll be $20. And they were doing that, apparently, some guys, because people wanted to get over, they could see over there all those people and all the activity. They knew that's the place to be. But you can't get from here to there except to get in the boat. They also opened up a ferry on the upriver side of the dam after the collapse so that people could go across on the ferry. So this is the kind of thing going on in the aftermath in Dixon. Business and schools were closed. Ferry opens up above the dam. Streets are silent. Church bells are ringing almost continually. Constant funeral processions. Poems and sermons were published in the newspaper. And then I saw this statement in the Minneapolis paper. Every window blind is down, and on nearly every door, the somber emblem of death is fluttering. And I'm wondering, on every door, the somber emblem of death is fluttering? What in the world are they talking about? Well, I did some research, and it's pretty clear what was going on with the somber emblem of death. It's crepe, which is a black fabric. And back then, they would drape things in black crepe as a sign of mourning in this house. And look at, for example, well, this is the Ring the Bell Softly poem, which I'm going to read to you here in just a second. This was in the Dixon paper on May the 7th. Ring the bell softly, there's crepe on the door. You'll see more about this in a minute. But back just 8 years earlier, when Lincoln died, he was assassinated in 1865, the Lincoln home in Springfield, most of you have probably been there before, was all draped in black crepe. You can see it on the windows here, all this stuff. All black crepe. That's what they did when people were in mourning. When Lincoln's body was laid out in the White House. Black crepe is everywhere. And one person who got this thing going was Queen Victoria. Her husband, Prince Albert, dies in 1861, and she wears black. How long did she wear black? 40 years. Yes, yes. She kind of, this is overkill, I think. But typically, from what I read, back in the 1870s, widows would wear black for like 3 years. Today, they wear black up until they're having martinis in the evening. So there's something different has changed in the culture. I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm just saying that's how things have changed. Well, Queen Victoria probably is doing overkill on this thing. But there's a lot of black crepe wreaths that would be placed on doors when they talk about the black emblem of death is fluttering. So this may be what they were looking at. When it says, ring the bell softly, there's crepe on the door in this poem. What is ring the bell softly? All of us have doorbells. Doo, doo, right? It's an electric thing, and we get the same noise. But there they had these turnbuckles. Some of you older folks know what I'm talking about. These you ring the bell. Here's another way to look at it. On the inside would be a bell. Inside of the door is this. On the outside is this. And you could ring it like this and it'd be really loud, or you could ring it softly and it wouldn't be quite so annoying to the people on the inside. So ring the bell softly. Now, I thought, I've made this presentation a few times, and some people expressed some interest in this poem, and so I thought I'd throw together just 2 verses of this thing. It lasts no more than 90 seconds, but I threw some music behind it, and I wanted you to get an idea for mourning customs and customs of funerals back in 1873. So listen to this. Someone has gone from this strange world of ours. No more to gather its thorns with its flowers. No more to linger where sunbeams must fade, where on all beauty death's fingers are laid. Weary with mingling life's bitter and sweet, weary with parting and never to meet. Someone has gone to the bright golden shore. Ring the bell softly, there's crepe on the door. Angels were anxiously longing to meet one who walks with them in heaven's bright street. Loved ones have whispered that someone is blessed
free from earth's trials and taking sweet rest. Yes, there is one more in angelic bliss, one less to cherish and one less to kiss. One more departed to heaven's bright shore. Ring the bell softly. There's crepe on the door.
And that sort of sets you back into that culture, into the time and the way people were dealing with grief at that time. And there was a lot of this going on in Dixon. 46 souls all died in all those funerals. So word spreads quickly, not just around town, but around the country about the event. The details of the horrible murder found their way around the globe. People were horror-stricken to read about it. Telegraph was busy answering dispatches from New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, New Orleans, and other large cities, even overseas. It's going on. These are places where I saw headlines in newspapers in cities around the country. Washington on the East Coast, on the West Coast, South, North, it doesn't make any difference. People are covering the great Dixon disaster all over the place. Headlines read, "The Baptism of Death," "The Great Disaster in Illinois," "Dixon's Horror." The name Dixon gets in these headlines frequently. "The Dixon Disaster," "Dixon's Woe," "The Great Bridge Murder" were the headlines on so many different papers throughout the country at this time. And of course, one thing that always happens when there's tragedy, the blame game begins. You got to blame somebody. You're looking around for somebody to blame for this stuff, and that was going on big time. They blamed the iron, fatigue in the iron. Truesdell, of course, got it. The city council was blamed. Their bidding bribery was accused. The bidding system was blamed. A.K. Truesdell was an attorney in Dixon. He was no relation to L.E. Truesdell, but he was blamed. Henry Strong, who took care of the bridge, he was the bridge tender. He took the tolls and he was in charge of watching over the bridge. He was blamed. And of course, the Baptists were blamed as well. You might think, why would they blame the Baptists? Well, I saw this quote in the Tribune. It says, "One man sank twice in the water and rose the third time when a vain effort was made to grasp him. As he was going down, he was heard to exclaim," and I'll fill in the blanks, "God damn the Baptists!" And with the curse on his lips, he sinks forever. Now, they put the blanks in the paper, but I had to fill in, you know what they were saying. Now, this has to be apocryphal. I can't think that this actually took place. But this was reported in the Tribune, so I don't know. So they blamed the Baptists for doing all this stuff. This is J.H. Pratt, a photo of him in later life. The Inter-Ocean, another paper that came out of Chicago, said the man is totally crushed with the weight of sorrow. He wanders about the wreck in melancholy sadness and seems constantly in silent prayer. He was badly affected by this. The story goes on, his health failed that very year. He left Dixon in November, I think, of '73. He dies 10 years later in 1883, and his body is brought back to Dixon. And he is buried to this day at Oakwood Cemetery, and that's his stone that you can see at Oakwood. So they also, but Truesdell, blaming Truesdell, this one seemed to stick. They gave different names to the bridge. The Truesdell trap, the patent wholesale drowning machine, all the horrible abortion. This was a good one, the truth. It's only suitable for a war measure to be used in an enemy's country. You want to kill off your enemy? Give him a Truesdell bridge. That'll take care of him. Hey. Now, the interesting thing here is, I'm wondering, when is Truesdell going to speak out? Now, he spoke out quickly after the Elgin Bridge went down, but week 1 goes by, the Dixon Bridge, nothing from Truesdell. Week 2 goes by, nothing from Truesdell. Finally, the third week, and Truesdell speaks. And he's in Massachusetts at that time. And he says, "I know that I never made a better bridge than the one at Dixon in every particular." Right. If some of the bolts had been loosened in the top cord near the connections and weights placed on the sidewalk, then the bridge would have fallen precisely as it is said to have fallen, and I cannot conceive of any other cause. So he's basically saying the same thing with Elgin. Yes, somebody messed with the bolts. Okay? This is a fun thing to do, right? He also said, It's been nearly 18 years since I began building, and iron bridges and the Elgin and Dixon bridges are the only ones that have fallen, and no loss of life except at Dixon. Can as much be said for any other plan? Well, sheesh, I hope so. I've only had 2 bridges collapse. What? I think none of them are supposed to collapse. Isn't that the idea? But that's what he said. This did not fly. So this was published, by the way, first off in the New York Tribune. That's where his responses were first published. They eventually got back to Dixon. We were not happy with his comments at all. So I got into looking at an engineering analysis of why the bridge collapsed. I think that question is going through all of our minds, and it gets to be somewhat complicated. But May 24th of 1873, this is 3 weeks after the disaster, the Scientific American magazine, which is still published today, had a story about it. And it said, "There's little question but that its theory of construction was wrong and the material poor and clearly inadequate. It's been the opinion of many engineers," they said, "that the Truesdell patent idea is a total failure. Too much light and cast iron is employed, and the lock joint arrangement so weakens the metal that its full strength cannot be gained." Now, I don't know what that means either, but they seem to think they knew what was going on there. Now, the interesting thing also, so the Scientific American is publishing then, the ASCE has their convention in late May of 1873, 3 weeks after the disaster. This happened it was already on the calendar. The ASCE is the American Society of Civil Engineers. They do bridges, right? They meet and they pass a resolution, because they've all heard of the Dixon Bridge disaster. "But be it resolved, in view of the late calamitous disaster of the falling of the bridge at Dixon, Illinois, that a committee be appointed to report at the next annual convention the most practicable means of averting such accidents." So all these engineers, the ASCE members, get into a study that goes on for years to try to determine why our bridge is going down. And it was the Dixon Bridge that kind of forced the hand there. And 2 years later, this is 1875, the ASCE comes out with their conclusions of the Dixon Committee. 3 causes of bridge failures were determined: that incompetent and corrupt builders, neglect during construction, and excessive loads. These were not blamed just directly on the Dixon Bridge, but on bridges in general that had been failing around the country. This was an interesting find, I thought, to find out that the ASCE had got onto the Dixon Bridge disaster and started to investigate because of that. So this is one conclusion that I came to that I had not had prior to that. The Dixon Bridge disaster led to the construction of better bridges in the United States. It was so horrific, so bad, they decided we got to do something. And now another thought. You probably are asking this question: why did so many women die? 80% of the fatalities were all women. Here's 4 different possibilities. Well, it was a church event, and it's still true today, as it was back then, as it was for hundreds of years, that more women go to church than men. And when you go down to the river to watch a baptism ceremony, the guy says, "No, you go ahead without me. I'll be okay." But the women, no, they're all over that. I gotta be careful. But there's another thought about chivalry. There was a couple of newspaper reports that said that men who were standing on the sidewalk before it collapsed, and they realizing all these women are wanting to get this great view of the baptism going on down below, and they said, "I hear the bridge cracking. I'm going to get off. You guys can take this spot." And the way they really, literally did get off the bridge and let the women have this spot. Well, I don't think they knew it was coming. Maybe they did. I don't know. But then also I wonder about swimming capability. I don't know about the typical women's sports in 1870s, but I don't think there's a lot of women's sporting activities going on in any sport. And so if you just throw a bunch of men and women in the water, the men are going to probably know how to swim and the women aren't. But not always true, but that's just a guess. But then here's the last one. This is the one that sticks in my mind, the clothing deal. These are dresses of the 1870s. I found pictures online. I don't know what's going on under there, but there's just a lot of stuff going on under there. I found this just a week ago. This was E. Butterick and Company, their New York fashions introduced in the fall of 1873. Look at this stuff. Yeah, I don't know what all this stuff is in the back end, but that can't be natural, I don't think. But, and you're not going to win any Olympic swimming races wearing one of these things. So you think about the clothing had a role in it? I got to think so. Here's a photo from 1869 in Dixon. And look at, there's only about 2 women in this photo, but what are they wearing? These big dresses. There's petticoats, maybe hoops. I don't know what they got going on there. But that's the thing. So I think that's got to be a cause. It was never addressed, though, in the literature that I could read. Now I'll tell you about my great-great-great-grandmother. She was on the bridge on that day. And the story has come down through my family for years. My great-great-great-grandmother is there, and she's holding her granddaughter, which is my great-grandmother, on the bridge. And as the bridge went down, she threw her granddaughter to safety, and she herself got trapped by the iron and died. But the granddaughter survived. Here's a photo of my great-grandmother, Kristen Goebel, and this is her daughter, Josephine Goebel, who married John Washington Wadsworth. That's where the Wadsworth family gets into that. But Kristen Goebel she might have got kicked by a horse sometime, I don't know. I'm sure I'm going to hell for that. She's a very nice lady, a devout member of the Baptist Church, I should point out. But that's she was married to James Goebel, who was the sheriff of Lee County from 1848 to 1850. And this is a cool photo. I want to look like this when I'm that age. I think I am that age, but I don't look like this. I look like Wild Bill Hickok or something, but he's got it going. He was well liked around town, and turned out all his kids died before he did, and he was alone until 1893. I found this article in the paper, published 5 days before the bridge went down. James Goebel and his wife had just moved back to Dixon. They had moved to Bloomington to be with their daughter and her husband and their 2 kids in Bloomington. And the paper publishes an article saying, "We're pleased to welcome back to our town old James Goebel and his wife. May himself and his excellent wife live long to enjoy the area." Published Dixon Sun, April 30, 1873. Well, she did not live long. She's dead 5 years later. 5 days later. Yeah, that's something. This is a picture of little Gertie Wadsworth that she was holding in her arms on the bridge. That's her brother Charles, but she just had Gertie with her. She's 3.5 years old, and down they go. And she throws Gertie to safety, and I've got like 7 or 8 different newspaper articles from around the country that reported on the fate of little Gertie Wadsworth. Some say she was pulled out of the water by her hair, she was unconscious, strangulation, you know. Some say she floated all down almost to the railroad bridge where she was pulled out, but she eventually recovered and survived, and I'm here to tell the tale. Right? And I went out to, this is at Oakwood Cemetery. This is where James Goebel, this is his stone here. And right next to it is Kristen Goebel, his wife. She died 20 years before he did. But at that time, I looked at her stone had broken. You see this crack here? This top end was down on the ground. And you couldn't read any of the inscriptions. You couldn't read her name on the side of it. And this it touched me. And so I had this plaque posted on her gravestone. Kristen Goebel, born and died 1873 in the Truesdell Bridge Disaster. And the cemetery folks were just great in helping me fix the stone as well as to get this affixed to it. By the way, great staff out at the cemetery. Wonderful people. So now I want to tell you about a piece of history. I found out about this yesterday. This is really cool. This is Mark Stock, who is with us here tonight, but he got a call from a farmer north of town, up by Woosung, who said, my farmhouse was built in the 1870s, and the story has been that we've got a piece of the Truesdell Bridge that we've had on our property. And if you want to have it, you can have it. And Mark immediately called me. He went up there and got it, and I went out to John Dixon Park with him and took this photo. And you study the details of this thing, and this is a photo of the bridge disaster. Now look a little closer over here. And this is, I turned his photo upside down. Folks, it's a match. And Mark brought it up. It's out there in the hallway right now. I don't know if you saw that when you came in. That is, to my knowledge, the only known remnant of the Truesdell Bridge. And it still exists to this day. 150 years old now. I thought that's pretty cool. And there it is. I don't know what to do with it, but there it is. I think maybe Steve Wilson, you'll take it here at the Loveland building. You do something with that? It's like 9 feet long and 3 feet tall. It meets the specs exactly as it was published in the paper. So that's pretty cool. Now, I'm almost done, guys. I've gone longer than I thought. This is important. The Dixon disaster's place in U.S. history. Back when I first did my research back in 2017, there was an article on Wikipedia that had a list of the worst bridge disasters in the world in history. And the Dixon Bridge disaster was not on it. At all. No mention. Nothing. So that inspired me to go ahead and write a Wikipedia article that got published in Wikipedia, and the entire story of the Dixon Bridge disaster is there to this day. But here's the list of the bad disasters. There's a distinction I'm making between a rail bridge, a walkway bridge, and a vehicle bridge. A rail bridge is where trains go on it. You know, when those things go down, that could be bad. This walkway bridge, some of you might remember in 1981, the Kansas City Hyatt Regency. This was like on New Year's Eve or something. They had these walkways on this atrium inside the thing, and they got a bunch of people on it, and they crashed down. I don't know, 100 people, 114 people died and 200 people were injured. But the Dixon, 46 people died, 56 people were injured. Second place is the Silver Bridge in 1967 in West Virginia. 46 people died and only 9 people were injured. So we had more. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but then I wrote the entire Wikipedia. I wrote this article then, and it's all footnoted. It was 50-some footnotes, and it passed the editors at Wiki. Not anybody can just throw something up there. It gets reviewed extensively. I was surprised to see how many people jumped in and actually edited my stuff. I was ticked, but but this is the point. The Dixon Bridge disaster is the worst road bridge disaster in American history. And I've made this point in my Wikipedia article in 2017, and nobody has challenged it to this day. And I can't find any evidence to refute it, and I think it holds true. There was a plaque at Pat Gorman and the Historical Society put together this effort to have a memorial plaque that's on the south side of the river, along the riverfront, and it lists all the people who died in the disaster, and you can see that to this day right down there in the riverfront. And there, starting in May, we're going to dedicate a new memorial display down there on the north side of the river. It's going to look something like this. This is a mock-up, but I just talked to the company yesterday, and we're about on target for it to be arriving in Dixon the first week of May, which is on the 150th anniversary. We'll get news out when we know more exactly when it's going to happen. But it's a big 8-foot by 8-foot display. It's not a small thing. It's a big deal because we think people ought to know that the worst road bridge disaster in American history took place here on May 4th of 1873. So isn't that fun?